Hello everyone, and welcome to After Alexander, episode 43, In-Laws. When we discussed the Second Syrian War back in episode 39, I mentioned the marriage alliance between the Seleucids and Ariarathes III of Cappadocia, but I said it was a topic for a future episode. So, today we're going to loop back around and examine it more closely, as well as a Seleukid marriage into the Antigonid family, which we've mentioned in a previous episode as well. Along the way, we'll dive into some of the politics going on in Anatolia at the time of the reign of Antiochus II, which I previously didn't really have time to cover, as well as exploring Ariarathes III's family in a bit more detail. So, with that, let's discuss marriages. First up is the marriage of Antiochus II's daughter, who I referred to as Little Stratonice when she was first introduced back in episode 34. She was married to Ariarathes III of Cappadocia, the son of Ariaramnes II of Cappadocia. This is incidentally also spelt as Ariamnes, which is what I'm going to go with for today's episode. Now, some background here. Cappadocia had been a province of the Achaemenid Empire. When the governor of the south of Cappadocia died in 334 BCE, Alexander the Great had tried to install a Macedonian governor, but he had proved unable to exercise control. However, our focus is on Ariarathes I, the ruler of the Cappadocian north. Before Alexander showed up, he took part in the Persian expedition to subdue Egypt, which had seceded decades earlier, under Artaxerxes III in 343 BCE. Jumping forward to Alexander's campaigns again, Ariarathes I's lands were not impacted as much by Alexander's conquests, and he would in fact fight at Gaugamela on the side of the Persians and later oppose the Macedonians. Eumenes, who we mentioned all the way back in the first few episodes, was granted the area in 323 BCE, but he couldn't get rid of Ariarathes or secure his authority over the area. He thus asked Perdiccas for help, and in 322 BCE, Macedonian forces were victorious over the forces Ariarathes was able to bring together. Ariarathes was taken prisoner and crucified, along with the majority of his relatives. Eumenes and then Antiochus I ruled in the area afterwards, but Ariarathes I's nephew and son by adoption, Ariarathes II, had managed to escape into Armenia, and later used Armenian support to take his lands back once Eumenes had died, killing the Macedonian governor called Amyntas in 301 BCE. However, he would have to acknowledge the overlordship of the Seleukid Empire. This Ariarathes II was the father of Ariamnes, catching us back up with the narrative and the wedding between Little Stratonice and Ariarathes III. The year for this marriage is listed by one of my sources as 257 BCE, which in our chronology would have been during the early years of the Second Syrian War, which we covered in episode 39. Strabo's writing points to a region called Cataonia being given to Cappadocia as her dowry. I've also seen it listed that Ariarathes III took this over himself, although the way it is written is ambiguous, so it may refer to this same event. Now, what is unanimously mentioned by my sources is that Cappadocia gained its independence at around about this time. However, the details have varied in my reading. The date for when it took place varies between 255 and 250 BCE. The chronologies of both Bevan and Grainger would support the earlier date, so that's what I'm going to go with for the purposes of our narrative. Moreover, whether it is Ariamnes II or Ariarathes III who gained independence also differs between sources. As an example, Bevan notes that Ariamnes II started styling himself as a king within the first 4 to 5 years of Antiochus II's reign, and that the Seleukid court recognised this. Ariarathes III was joint ruler with his father Ariamnes from a certain point in time, and I've seen either 262 or 255 BCE listed as the starting date for this arrangement. Furthermore, I've seen it stated in different sources that, when the former's marriage to Little Stratonice took place, he was either designated as king or took the title. Alternatively, I've seen it listed that Ariaramnes rose up against the Seleucids, leading to Cappadocia detaching itself from Seleukid orbit. This would seem to somewhat align with what Bevan says about the first Cappadocian monarch being Ariaramnes. What I'm going to go with for our narrative is that Ariaramnes broke away from Seleukid overlordship, but his son, and co-ruler from a certain point in time, was the first actual king of Cappadocia after his marriage to the daughter of Antiochus II. The son born from the marriage of little Stratonice and Ariarathes III would be the future Ariarathes IV. Both Ariarathes III and Ariarathes IV will appear again in our story. The former in connection to a man we've mentioned on and off for these last few episodes, Antiochus II's son, little Antiochus. When we properly delve into his life, we'll also have occasion to discuss a sister of Ariarathes III, but that's for a future episode. With all of that out of the way, let's return to a family who have been in our narrative since the wars following Alexander's death, the Antigonids. As a brief reminder, the current ruler at this point in our narrative is Antigonus II, the son of Demetrius I and the grandson of Antigonus I, who chased Seleucus out of Babylon all those decades ago. However, the individual who is important for our purposes today is the son of the current ruler, the future Demetrius II. Now, Demetrius II was, as we've mentioned before, married into the Seleukid family. Specifically, he was married to another Stratonice, this time the sister of Antiochus II and the daughter of Antiochus I and the original Stratonice. As we've seen before and as we're returning to today, the Antigonid family tree gets complicated. This is because the original Stratonice was the daughter of Demetrius I and the sister of Antigonus II, making Demetrius II and this new Stratonice first cousins. However, Demetrius II was also the son of Phila, a child of the original Stratonice from her first marriage to Seleucus. Antigonus II had thus married his niece, and Demetrius II was thus also his new wife's uncle through their mutual connection to Stratonice I. If this all sounds complicated, you're not alone in thinking that. I had to draw it out to get my head round it for this part of the script. Anyway, back to the point. Demetrius II would actually be married several times throughout his life. He and this new Stratonice had a daughter Apama in approximately 250 BCE, who was also known as Apama III. Stratonice was his first wife, but separated from him when he married for a second time to a woman called Nicaea in 245/244 BCE. This storyline will crop up again when we get to Seleucus II in a few years' time. Wife number 3 was Phthia, the daughter of Alexander II of Epirus, who we mentioned back in episode 33. Demetrius and Phthia would marry in 239 BCE. However, it was his fourth wife, Chryseis, who would be the mother of his eventual heir, Philip V of Macedon. Demetrius married Chryseis when she gave birth to Philip circa 237 BCE. After Demetrius II's death in 229 BCE, Chryseis would go on to marry the future Antigonus III. But, as with the Cappadocians, that's for a future episode. Finally, let's round off today's discussion with a short stay in Anatolia. Different sources have made different points about Antiochus II's attitude towards Anatolia, although there generally seem to have been changes between the regimes of Antiochus I and Antiochus II. It has been noted that the only difference in attitude towards Anatolia between Antiochus I and II is that the latter stopped fighting with Eumenes, the ruler of Pergamon whom we mentioned in episode 31, and that Eumenes kept his domains as either a vassal or friend of the Seleucids. Equally, it has been suggested that the union of little Stratonice and Ariarathes III indicates that Antiochus II had a distinct vision from his father in terms of how to deal with his Anatolian neighbours. To summarise the situation in Anatolia at this point, Bithynia, Pontus and Cappadocia are now the kingdoms which lie in the north of the peninsula. The Galatians are still present in Anatolia, as they have been since we first introduced them back in the reign of Antiochus I, and Armenia lies further to the east, under the rule of a dynasty from Iran. Both they and Media Atropatene further east appear to have kept out of the doings of the Seleukid Empire. With all of this said, the Seleukids could never take their eye off the region in order to keep the various political players in check. So, that's an overview of Anatolia at this point, and a discussion of two marriages during the reign of Antiochus II. Next time, we will zoom out again and return to our narrative to discuss the events at the close of the Second Syrian War. Specifically, we will discuss an important marriage alliance that will spring from the war's end, and introduce a new player into our narrative, Berenike Fernophorus. Until then, thank you all for listening. Feel free to get in touch at the show's email address for any questions or comments. Until next time, have a great week, everyone.